While you were scrolling TikTok, Australia just signed a $40 billion deal with Malaysia that could reshape the entire Asia-Pacific economy, and almost nobody noticed. This isn't about trade. It's about something far more valuable and far more controversial. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why 3 other countries are secretly negotiating similar deals right now, and why the outcome could determine which nations lead the green energy revolution for the next 50 years. If you've ever wondered why your gas prices keep changing, or why certain countries suddenly become economic powerhouses overnight while others get left behind, this story will blow your mind. But wait. Before we begin, please subscribe to ensure that you never miss out on any of my essential stuff. Comment "I subscribe" below, and I will personally welcome you to our community. With that said, let's get started. December 2024. Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. A conference room that seats 200 people. Only 30 show up. The international press? They barely send anyone. CNN isn't there. BBC sends a junior reporter who leaves after the opening remarks. But in that room, 2 leaders shake hands on a deal worth $40 billion over 15 years. To put that in perspective, that's bigger than Malaysia's entire annual defense budget. That's larger than Australia's aid to all Pacific nations combined. That's the GDP of 47 countries. And the media treated it like a footnote. What are they trading? Not smartphones. Not palm oil. Not even oil itself. Critical minerals. Lithium. Rare earths. Nickel. Cobalt. The stuff your phone, your laptop, your future electric car, and your renewable energy grid absolutely cannot exist without. Some analysts call them the blood diamonds of the Green Revolution. And they're not wrong. Let me introduce you to David Chen. He's 42 years old, an Australian mining engineer who spent the last 15 years in the red dirt of Western Australia. He's worked in mines so remote that the nearest town is 4 hours away. He's watched something deeply concerning happen over the past decade. Chinese companies were quietly buying up extraction rights while Western governments looked the other way, David tells me over a crackling Zoom call from his site office. They weren't loud about it. No big announcements. Just steady, strategic acquisitions. By 2022, they controlled critical infrastructure for rare earth processing across Australia. But 2023 changed everything. When China restricted rare earth exports in 2023, David says, his voice tight, our entire supply chain almost collapsed. Factories shut down. Construction projects got delayed for months. Electric vehicle manufacturers couldn't get the materials they needed. This Malaysia deal? It's not just business. It's our insurance policy. And he's not exaggerating. According to a 2024 report from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, and this number should terrify you, 73% of critical mineral processing worldwide is controlled by one country. Not mining. Processing. That's a crucial difference. Lots of countries mine these minerals. But processing them, turning raw or into usable materials, that's where 80% of the value is created. And China dominates that choke point. This deal with Malaysia could shift that control by 18% within just 5 years. That's massive. That's geopolitically revolutionary. Without these minerals, David explains, there are no smartphones, no electric cars, no wind turbines, no solar panel inverters, no green future. We're not talking about luxury items here. We're talking about the physical foundation of the 21st century economy. So why Malaysia? Why now? But here's what the press release didn't tell you, what the government officials carefully avoided mentioning in their speeches. There's a third player in this game. And they're not happy at all. Let's talk about the elephant, or should I say, the dragon, in the room. China's Belt and Road Initiative has poured $47 billion into Malaysia since 2016. Roads connecting cities that were previously isolated. Ports that can handle 3 times the cargo they could a decade ago. Railways. Power plants. Malaysia's entire infrastructure boom over the past 8 years? Largely Chinese-funded. And now Malaysia just signed a megadeal with China's primary strategic competitor in the Asia-Pacific region. Think about that for a second. Imagine borrowing money from one friend to build your house, then immediately partnering with their rival to run a business out of that house. Awkward doesn't even begin to describe it. Let me introduce you to Amina Rahman. She's 38 years old, works as a logistics coordinator at Port Klang, Malaysia's busiest port and one of Southeast Asia's most critical shipping hubs. She's watching her entire industry get caught in a geopolitical tug-of-war, and she doesn't like what she's seeing. Half-hour port traffic, she explains, leaning against a shipping container during her lunch break, the smell of salt water and diesel fuel heavy in the air, is Chinese-manufactured goods heading to Australia. Electronics, machinery, consumer products. The other half, Australian resources heading to China. Iron ore, coal, natural gas. She pauses, looking out at the massive cargo ships lined up on the horizon. Now we're the country doing deals with both sides. We're literally in the middle. How long before someone forces us to choose? How long before this gets ugly? The numbers tell the story she's afraid of. Malaysia's annual trade with China, $98 billion. Malaysia's annual trade with Australia, $18 billion. This new deal could change those ratios dramatically over the next decade, and Beijing is definitely watching. A 2024 study by the Singapore Institute of International Affairs, one of the region's most respected think tanks, surveyed government officials across Southeast Asia. The results should concern anyone who cares about regional stability. 64% fear being forced to choose sides between China and Western allies in the coming decade. That's not paranoia. That's lived reality. What happens when your biggest customer gets angry at your new best friend? Amina asks, and the fear in her voice is real. China's our largest trading partner. But Australia's offering technology we desperately need. How do we navigate that without getting crushed? Within 72 hours of the deal announcement, Chinese state media published 14 articles questioning Malaysia's strategic alignment and commitment to regional cooperation. Coincidence? Remember what happened to Australia in 2020. China banned Australian coal, Australian wine, barley, beef. A trade war that lasted 2 years and cost Australia $20 billion in lost exports. And that was just economic punishment for Australia advocating for an investigation into COVID-19's origins. What might China do to Malaysia? A smaller economy. More dependent on Chinese investment. More vulnerable. That's what keeps me up at night, Amina admits. Not the work. Not the logistics. The question of whether I'll even have a job if this geopolitical chess game goes wrong. But that's just the surface. The real story, the part that actually matters for the future of technology, energy, and economic power, is happening 300 meters underground, in mines that most people don't even know exist. There's a mine in Pahang, Malaysia, a mountainous region, mostly jungle, incredibly remote, that holds more lithium than most people realize exists. Enough lithium to power 40 million electric vehicles. Just one mine. Here's why you should care, why this matters to your life right now. Your smartphone contains about 0.3 grams of lithium in its battery. Your laptop? Maybe 2 grams. An electric vehicle? 10 kilograms. A grid-scale battery that stores renewable energy for a small town? 2,000 kilograms. Scale that up globally, and you start to understand the magnitude of demand coming. The International Energy Agency's 2024 report dropped a bomb that barely made headlines. Global lithium demand will explode by 340% by 2030. That's not a typo. 340%. And current supply projections? They're only meeting 67% of that projected need. That's not a shortage. That's a catastrophe waiting to happen. That's entire industries grinding to a halt because they can't get the raw materials they need. James Wu learned this the expensive way. He's a Singaporean entrepreneur who runs a mid-sized electric vehicle manufacturing company. In 2023, his Chinese lithium suppliers tripled their prices almost overnight. No warning, he says, still sounding bitter a year later. No negotiation. We had a contract, or so I thought. They just sent a new price sheet and basically said take it or leave it. What were we going to do? We had orders to fulfill. His company lost $12 million that year. We had orders for 5,000 vehicles, James explains, rubbing his temples like the memory still causes physical pain. We could only fulfill 1,800. The rest? Cancelled. And you don't just cancel orders without penalty fees. Those penalty fees ate our profit for the entire year. We almost went under. Now imagine that happening to major car manufacturers, to grid battery producers, to electronics companies. When one country controls supply, they control everything. That's where this Australia-Malaysia deal becomes genius. It includes price stability mechanisms. Lithium costs get locked in for 7-year periods. No surprise spikes. No weaponized supply. No take-it-or-leave-it power plays. The Malaysia-Australia corridor? James says, and for the first time in our interview, he smiles. It's our lifeline. Stable prices, ethical sourcing, zero political blackmail. That's what we need to build a sustainable business. But the deal goes deeper than just stable prices. Australia gets something they've wanted for decades: processing infrastructure. Let me explain why that matters. For a century, Australia's economic model has been simple. Dig stuff out of the ground. Ship it to other countries raw. Let them process it and capture the real value. Iron ore. Mined in Australia, processed into steel in China. Bauxite. Mined in Australia, processed into aluminum in China. Lithium? You get the pattern. Raw materials are low-value exports. You're basically selling rocks. Processing is where 80% of value gets created. This deal flips that model. Processing facilities get built in both Malaysia and Australia. 4 new processing plants in Malaysia by 2027. 2 in Australia, both co-owned with Malaysian firms. Malaysia gets Australian technology transfer. Not sold, transferred. Shared expertise. Shared intellectual property. Both nations get to tell monopolistic suppliers, we have options now. We're not dependent on you anymore. It's elegant. It's strategic. It's the kind of economic partnership that could actually reshape regional power dynamics. The jobs impact? 23,000 processing jobs in Malaysia alone. Average salary: $47,000 annually. That's double the national median income. For Australia, 8,500 processing jobs, plus expansion of existing mining operations. Both countries building industrial capacity instead of just extracting resources. But, and this is a big but, processing is dirty work. Chemicals. Industrial waste. Water consumption. Environmental damage. Which brings us to the problem that environmental groups are screaming about, the paradox that might undermine the entire green energy revolution. Because to save the planet with electric vehicles and renewable energy, we might be destroying it faster than fossil fuels ever did. Every electric car that replaces a gas guzzler is presented as an environmental win. And in terms of carbon emissions over the vehicle's lifetime, it absolutely is. But there's a darker truth nobody wants to print on the brochure. Every ton of lithium extracted requires 500,000 gallons of water. In drought-prone regions. In ecosystems that can't regenerate fast enough. In communities that depend on that water for survival. Sarah Osman knows this better than most people. She's 29 years old, a Malaysian environmental scientist with a master's degree in ecology. And in 2023, she literally stood in front of bulldozers to stop a rare earth mining project in Kuantan, a coastal city in eastern Malaysia. I grew up near a mining site, Sarah tells me, sitting in her small Kuala Lumpur apartment surrounded by research papers and environmental impact reports. The river that ran through our town turned orange. Just orange. This weird, rusty color that didn't look real. Fish died. People got sick. Skin conditions, respiratory problems. My neighbor's daughter developed a chronic cough that never went away. I watched my entire hometown become what activists call a sacrifice zone. A place destroyed so other places can have nice things. That experience radicalized her. By 2023, she was at every environmental protest, organizing activists, coordinating with international NGOs. She was the person standing in front of bulldozers holding signs that read, "No mining. No destruction." But then something unexpected happened. I was at a protest site, Sarah recalls, holding a sign that said, "No mining," in big red letters. An older worker, probably in his 50s, wearing a hard hat and work boots covered in mud, walked up to me. He wasn't angry. He wasn't confrontational. He just asked me a question. "What's your phone made of? That LED screen on your sign? The metal in those bulldozers you're blocking? Where do you think that comes from?" He wasn't trying to be mean. He was genuinely asking. And I didn't have a good answer. That question haunted Sarah for months. "I realized something," she says quietly. "We can't stop mining. We can't stop progress. People want electric cars because climate change is real. They want renewable energy because fossil fuels are killing the planet. They want smartphones and laptops because modern life requires them. But we can demand it's done right. We can demand that mining doesn't destroy communities. That's the fight that actually matters." And that's where this Australia-Malaysia deal surprised her. This agreement has the strictest environmental clauses I've ever seen in a resource contract, Sarah says, and she's read hundreds of them during her research. Mandatory environmental impact assessments before any excavation can begin. Indigenous consultation requirements, and not just performative consultation, but actual veto power for indigenous communities whose land is affected. The list goes on: water recycling systems at every processing site. Biodiversity offset programs. For every hectare mined, 2 hectares must be protected elsewhere. Restoration bonds. Companies must put money up front for land restoration before they can even start mining. A 2024 University of Queensland study backs up the technological claims. Australian mining operations have reduced water usage by 43% through closed-loop water recycling systems developed over the past decade. The deal mandates that this technology gets transferred to Malaysia. Not sold. Not licensed. Transferred. This is the first major resource agreement that treats environmental protection as non-negotiable, not an afterthought, Sarah says. That matters. That's precedent-setting. But there's another perspective that needs to be heard: the people whose land is actually being mined. Meet Tok Batan Alung. He's 67 years old, the leader of an Orang Asli Semai community in Pahang. The Orang Asli are Malaysia's indigenous peoples, and Tok Batan's tribe has lived in these forests for 5,000 years. When mining companies first approached his community, his answer was immediate and absolute. "I said no. Absolutely no," Tok Batan recalls, speaking through a translator. "This is our land. Our ancestors are buried here. The trees know our songs. The rivers know our prayers. You cannot put a price on that. But then something unusual happened. They came back, he says. Not with money. Not with threats. With a question, what would make this acceptable to you? Nobody ever asked us that before. What followed were 18 months of negotiations. Not with corporate lawyers. With community members. Elders. Young people who wanted economic opportunities. The final terms include 12% revenue share paid directly to indigenous communities. Permanent seats on environmental oversight committees. Cultural heritage sites marked as absolute no-mining zones. Employment priority for local tribal members, with training programs funded by the mining companies. Is it perfect? Talk Batten asks rhetorically. No. Some in my community still oppose it. We had families split over this decision. But it's better than what Chinese companies offered, which was nothing. And better than what Malaysian companies did in the past, which was steal our land and pay us later in court after the damage was done. But Sarah Osman remains cautiously skeptical. Implementation oversight is handled by a joint committee with representatives from both governments, mining companies, and NGOs, she explains. Will they actually enforce these rules when profits are on the line? Will Talk Batten's community actually get to exercise veto power, or will it become performative consultation? History says, maybe not. She's right to be concerned. Environmental clauses exist in 78% of modern mining contracts globally, according to a 2024 Transparency International study. Only 34% are fully enforced. That gap between promise and reality, that's where communities get destroyed and corporations get rich. And then there's the factor that could make this entire deal collapse overnight, something neither Australia nor Malaysia can fully control. The unpredictable chaos of democracy. Malaysian elections are scheduled for 2027. That's less than 2 years away. And opposition parties are already sharpening their knives, preparing campaigns that frame this deal as the greatest betrayal of Malaysian sovereignty since independence. They're calling it Economic Colonialism 2.0. Resource extraction dressed up as partnership. Selling Malaysia's future for short-term jobs and empty promises. And it's resonating with voters, especially young ones. Meet Razak bin Abdullah. He's 51 years old, an opposition member of parliament, and a former economics professor at University of Malaya. He's articulate, passionate, and deeply skeptical of this deal. Let me explain exactly how this works, Razak says, leaning forward across his desk in parliament, his voice sharp with frustration. Australia takes our resources that belong to the Malaysian people, that sit under Malaysian soil. They process them using technology that we paid for through this deal. Then they sell finished products back to us at 400% markup. He pauses for effect. Where's the partnership in that? This is extraction with a smile and a handshake. It's colonialism with better PR. It's a compelling argument, especially when delivered with Razak's rhetorical skill. His alternative vision: we should develop processing capacity ourselves. Yes, it takes longer. Maybe 10, 15 years instead of 5. Yes, it's more expensive upfront. But in 15 years, we own the entire value chain. Not just the mines. The technology. The expertise. The profits. All of it stays in Malaysia. At his political rallies, and I've watched footage of several, Razak tells stories that every Malaysian knows. British colonial exploitation of tin mines. Rubber plantations that made England rich while Malaysian workers died of disease and exhaustion. Japanese occupation during World War II. Decades of resources flowing out while prosperity failed to flow in. They took our resources then, Razak declares to crowds of thousands. They're taking them now. The only difference is the PowerPoint presentations look nicer. And it's working. Recent polling shows 42% of Malaysians under 35 agree that Malaysia should develop resources independently, even if slower and more expensive. That's a massive political block. But the government has its own counter-arguments, backed by equally compelling data. Meet Nurul Hassan. She's 45 years old, Malaysia's trade minister, and the lead negotiator who actually signed this deal. She's heard Razak's speeches. She's read the polls. And she thinks the opposition is selling a fantasy. Opposition talks about independence, Nurul says, speaking from her ministry office in Putrajaya. Beautiful word. Powerful word. But independence doesn't mean isolation. South Korea built their entire economy through strategic partnerships with the United States and Japan. Singapore succeeded through alliances, not isolation. She pulls out a report, Oxford Economics, 2024. Resource partnerships with local processing clauses increase national GDP by an average of 2.3% over 10 years. Without processing, only 0.7%. That's the difference between transformation and stagnation. For Nurul, this is deeply personal. I have 3 daughters, she says quietly. When I signed this deal, I thought about their future. What jobs will exist for them? What skills will they need? What opportunities can Malaysia provide? This isn't about what Australia gets. It's about what Malaysia becomes. A processing hub. A technology center. A country that doesn't just dig holes in the ground but builds the future. The projected numbers support her. 47,000 new jobs by 2029. Technology transfer programs worth $3.2 billion. Scholarships for 8,000 Malaysian students at Australian universities. But here's the fear that political analysts whisper about in private conversations. If political winds shift, contracts can be renegotiated. Sometimes torn up entirely. Indonesia did exactly that in 2023. They banned raw nickel exports overnight. Forced every mining company to either build processing facilities in Indonesia or leave the country entirely. Some companies left, walked away from billions in investments. But others, the smart ones, stayed and invested $15 billion in local Indonesian processing infrastructure. Could Malaysia do the same? Razak certainly thinks so. The moment we win power, we renegotiate. Australia can process in Malaysia only if Malaysian companies own 51% of processing facilities. Not 49%. Not 50%. Controlling majority. They won't like it. They'll threaten to pull out. But what are they actually going to do? Abandon the mines they've already invested billions in? Walk away from decades-long supply contracts? They'll complain. Then they'll negotiate. Then they'll agree. David Chen, the Australian mining engineer we met earlier, anticipated exactly this scenario. We built redundancy into everything, he explains. 6 extraction sites spread across 3 different Malaysian states. Partnerships with local politicians across party lines. Not just the ruling coalition, but opposition leaders, community organizations, religious groups. We've structured revenue sharing so money flows directly to local communities. Schools, clinics, roads. When people see tangible benefits in their villages, when their children get scholarships, when their hospitals get new equipment, political rhetoric becomes much harder to sell. It's insurance against nationalization. Smart strategy built on the assumption that politics will get messy. If one site gets politically complicated, David says, we pivot. We don't abandon the country. We adjust. But that raises the fundamental question, the one that cuts through all the economic projections and political posturing. In a democracy, can economic logic override nationalist emotion? Especially in the age of social media, where TikTok videos and Facebook posts can spread misinformation faster than fact-checkers can debunk it. Where a viral video of a contaminated river, even if it's from an old mine that has nothing to do with this deal, can turn public opinion overnight. And that brings us to the question nobody in power wants to answer honestly. When billions of dollars are at stake, when corporations and governments are both deeply invested in making this work, who really wins? Follow the money. Always follow the money. That's the rule that never fails. The corporate players behind this deal. BHP, Australian mining giant. Market cap, $151 billion. Rio Tinto, Anglo-Australian Mining Corporation. Market cap, $108 billion. 3 Malaysian state-owned enterprises. Combined market cap, $25 billion. When the deal was announced, BHP stock jumped 7% in a single day. That's $10.5 billion in shareholder value created in 24 hours. Just from an announcement. Who owns those shares? Pension funds. Investment banks. Billionaire portfolios. Institutional investors. So yes, big corporations win. Obviously. But let's go deeper. Let's talk about people whose lives actually, tangibly change. Meet Zuriana Ismail. She's 27 years old, graduated from University of Malaya in 2023 with an engineering degree. Strong grades. Internship experience. Bilingual. And she couldn't find work for 18 months. I sent out over 200 applications, Zuriana says, her voice still carrying the frustration of that period. Every single job listing wanted 3 years of experience. How do you get experience when nobody will hire you without experience? It's insane. She ended up working at a coffee shop, making lattes for business professionals, earning $400 a month with an engineering degree that cost her family tens of thousands to obtain. My parents never said anything, Zuriana recalls, her eyes getting wet. But I could see the disappointment, the confusion. They sacrificed so much for my education, and I was making coffee. Then this deal happened. A joint venture lithium processing facility opened applications. They were specifically looking for recent engineering graduates. Zuriana applied, got interviewed, and was hired within 2 weeks. Her role, process optimization engineer. Her salary, $2,800 monthly. Triple the national average income for her age group. I can finally move out of my parents' house, she says, and the relief in her voice is palpable. I can start paying off my student loans. I can begin my actual life, not this limbo I've been stuck in where I'm an adult on paper but still completely dependent. Multiply Zuriana's story by thousands. The deal's proponents say 63% of new jobs will specifically target workers under 30. Technology training programs. Apprenticeships. Scholarships to Australian universities for advanced degrees. Real people. Real opportunities. Real social mobility in a country where economic advancement has stagnated for years. That's the hope trigger. That's what makes people support this deal despite the risks. But then there's Ahmad Faisal's story. He's 34 years old. Malaysian mining equipment operator. 12 years of experience working in mines across the country. And he just got rejected from 3 different processing facilities. They keep saying, new jobs, Ahmad says, bitterness seeping through. But what about those of us already working in this industry? I applied to every processing facility within 100 kilometers. All rejected. The reason? They said I lack processing experience. I've operated mining equipment for 12 years. I understand geology. I know safety protocols better than most. But because I don't have specific lithium processing experience, which nobody in Malaysia has because we haven't had processing facilities, they hired Australians instead. Ahmed's frustration is specific. One facility hired 6 Australian process engineers at salaries 5 times what I make. So I'm supposed to go back to school at 34, take a pay cut to become a trainee, compete with fresh graduates, while expats make massive salaries. Where's my opportunity in this deal? It's a valid question that exposes the tension at the heart of this entire partnership. Of the 47,000 projected jobs, how many actually go to Malaysians versus imported expertise? The contract doesn't specify mandatory ratios. A World Bank analysis from 2024 looked at similar resource partnerships across Africa, South America, and Asia. Their finding is uncomfortable. Only 41% of created jobs go to local nationals in the first 5 years. The rest? Expatriates. Contract workers from Australia, Chile, Argentina, countries with existing processing expertise. Malaysia doesn't have 47,000 trained lithium processing workers sitting around unemployed, explains Dr. Kamala Devi, an economist at University of Singapore who studies resource-based development. They need to be trained. And while training programs are being developed, companies hire experienced workers from abroad. It's economically rational, but it creates social tension. People see foreigners getting high-paying jobs while locals wait for training programs that may take years. This is the gap between development and dependence. Is Malaysia building genuine capacity, training a generation of workers who will eventually replace foreign expertise? Or is it becoming a resource extraction point with better infrastructure but continued dependence on foreign knowledge? Nurul Hassan, the trade minister, insists the deal includes safeguards. We wrote sunset clauses into the contract. In 2030, both governments review actual outcomes. If local employment targets aren't met, if environmental standards are violated, if communities aren't seeing benefits, either side can renegotiate or exit entirely. David Chen acknowledges the stakes. If this deal fails, if it becomes just another corporate profit scheme, it poisons the well for every future partnership in Southeast Asia. China wins by default. So we're genuinely motivated to make this work. The 5-year test is coming. Results will be measured, analyzed, and weaponized by both supporters and opponents. But while Malaysia and Australia negotiate their partnership, 3 other countries are watching very, very closely. And they're already making moves. Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand. 3 Southeast Asian countries with their own critical mineral reserves. 3 countries trying to figure out their own path forward. And they're all watching the Malaysia-Australia deal like it's a real-time case study. Indonesia has the world's largest nickel reserves. In 2023, they took the nationalist route, banned raw nickel exports entirely, forced mining companies to build local processing or leave. Some companies left, but others invested $15 billion in Indonesian processing infrastructure. Now Indonesia is exploring lithium partnerships. Australian officials have visited Jakarta 5 times in the past year. Japanese and South Korean delegations are also making offers. Indonesia is using the Malaysia deal as a negotiating template, but demanding even better terms. Vietnam has massive rare earth deposits in northern provinces near the Chinese border. Geopolitically sensitive location. Strategically valuable resources. Government officials have visited Australia twice in the past 6 months. Publicly, they discuss tourism cooperation and education exchanges. Behind closed doors? Resource negotiations. Processing partnerships. Technology transfers. Thailand doesn't have Malaysia's reserves. But they're positioning themselves as a processing and logistics hub anyway. You don't need to mine resources to be part of the value chain, explains Somchai Watana, a Thai economic policy advisor. You can be the place where resources get processed, where logistics get coordinated, where regional trade flows through. This is the domino effect playing out in real time. If the Malaysia deal succeeds, if local jobs actually materialize, if environmental standards hold, if communities genuinely benefit, it becomes a template. A model that other countries copy and adapt. If it fails, If it becomes corporate profit extraction wrapped in development rhetoric, every country either turns back to China's Belt and Road model or goes fully nationalist like Indonesia tried. The next 6 months are critical. March 2025. First processing facility breaks ground in Pahang. Construction begins with ceremony attended by both prime ministers. April 2025. First local hiring wave. Thousands of applications. Hundreds of jobs. The ratio of Malaysian versus foreign hires gets scrutinized by media and opposition parties. May 2025. First Environmental Oversight Committee meeting. Indigenous representatives, NGO observers, government officials, corporate liaisons all in the same room. Can they actually work together, or will it become performative theater? This matters globally, not just regionally. The country that controls critical mineral supply chains doesn't just get rich. They acquire geopolitical leverage. They can decide which countries get priority access to materials for green technology. Which countries get price stability. Which countries get left behind. This isn't just about Australia and Malaysia building a partnership. It's about whether Western democracies can compete with China's Belt and Road playbook. It's about whether ethical sourcing and environmental protection can coexist with profitability. It's about whether small and mid-sized countries can negotiate with giants without getting crushed. The answers will emerge over the next 5 years. And almost nobody is paying attention. So here's what I need you to tell me in the comments. If you were Malaysia, would you take the $40 billion, the jobs, and the technology, knowing it might make you dependent on Australia and seriously anger your biggest trading partner, China? Or would you reject it and try to develop these resources independently, even if it takes 20 years longer and costs twice as much? And if you're Australian, do you trust your government and these corporations to actually enforce environmental and labor standards when cutting corners could boost profits? Because here's what nobody's saying out loud. The next 6 months will determine who controls the green energy supply chain for the next 50 years. And that decision is happening right now, with almost no public attention and minimal media coverage. I'm tracking this story. Next video drops when the first processing facility breaks ground in March. I'll have exclusive footage, interviews with workers on the ground, and analysis you won't see in mainstream media. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it. Because this is the biggest story not being covered, and it's going to change everything about global power, economic development, and the future of energy. Drop a Australia if you think Australia played this strategically smart. Drop a Malaysia if you think Malaysia got the better end of this deal. Or drop a China if you think China's going to find a way to torpedo this entire partnership. I'll see you in the comments. And I read every single one.